Tony Siracusa, since we've got you here, and of course,
Sure.
you are covering the ACC and Wake Forest in particular. You know, there was, all of this controversy and all of this talk surrounding ACC, and they did make this mammoth move, bringing in Stanford and Cal, but it's been
And
all quiet on the
SMU.
West. What's that?
And SMU. Let's not
And
forget
SMU,
the
yes,
Pony
SMU.
Express.
They don't even have to, put them on the books. Just
No, they don't.
let them
Or
play
Stanford.
football,
Yeah.
and yeah, they don't cost us anything. Yeah, sure, you can play. But otherwise, all quiet on the Eastern Front concerning Florida State, Clemson. We heard a little rumble a few weeks ago out of Clemson. There was a lot of talk out there about, man, they are ready to make something happen. Now, I didn't hear a whole lot of substantive details on how that would happen, but where do we stand with these supposed departures?
I would not be misguided or misled by the quiet. Florida State's athletic director, he took a lot of heat for being so vocal. It kind of really, even the schools within the conference that agree with him, which specifically North Carolina, Virginia, Clemson, basically quietly, privately, in whatever nice country club over brandies and cigars they do these things at, basically told him to shut up, because you're being vocal about things is putting a spotlight on an issue that we'd really rather deal with quietly, privately. So I wouldn't be misled by, there's no headlines being made. I think that, look, Jim Phillips went out and and he had been talking to Stanford and Cal and SMU for well over a month, never brought it to a vote because he knew he didn't have the votes to get it passed. And so we're not going to do it. Then North Carolina State flipped, which is a whole interesting dynamic within the state of North Carolina, because
and are they the next AAU school?
Well, it's not even. North Carolina State spends a considerable amount of time trying not to be in the shadow of the University of North Carolina, yet they were following them step for step in the expansion conversation. And then one day they flipped and said, "You know what? We'll approve it." That was the last vote that Phillips needed to get this through.
Well, look, North Carolina State fan alumni were outraged.
Absolutely.
When the 6 new AAU schools came in and they were not one of them.
Absolutely.
So there are no two better friends in the world to have if you want to join the AAU than Stanford and Cal.
Look, the issue has always, you got the money, and part of the deciding factor obviously was that ESPN has extra money for the conference if they expand, but it's not proportionate to what everybody is already getting. All right. It's at a much smaller percentage. However, you're getting SMU, which does not want a share of the TV contract for 7 years. Mind-boggling. They are, I know your audience. Look, Mark, I know your audience. These are intelligent sports people. So they know SMU. This is one of the wealthiest schools in the country. Their donor base is staggering. They have a guy whose name escapes me at the moment, who used to be in the oil industry. Now he's an oil investor. And he headed up the group that put $300 million in SMU's pocket, just a starter, walking around money, we'll call it, so that you can live the way you've been living without having to worry about not getting the ACC TV money, right? His response when interviewed about it was, it's a few $100 million. No one's going to lose sleep over it. All right, man. I need to get on, one of those genealogy sites and find how this guy and I are related somehow.
I will say, though, one thing about the SMU donor base is that people are going to get mad at me for saying this. They're a little bit more of the, oh, we're good for it kind of mentality than the check writing mentality. Like the SMU endowment is only like, I don't know, I think it's less than $2 billion.
Yeah, but you know what? But this donor base, this donor base pays cash.
They do, but the school, but what you do have a risk though.
Yeah,
that the school needs to make. They need to make sure that is a little more locked down than just the, oh, we'll keep it up, because that's the kind of thing where a disruption of people get mad at the athletic director, or there's a problem with the president, or a scandal. SMU doesn't have that money necessarily per se. It's not like Stanford, where Stanford could just burp and buy ESPN and give itself a contract if it wanted.
Right. Look, and you're right. The difference is this. Stanford, actually, part of the reason Stanford wins the Directors Cup every year is because they field more teams than pretty much anyone else in the country. They have 7 teams that are fully endowed by boosters. The expenses for those 7 teams don't even come out of the athletic department budget, right? They're fully endowed. So you're right. That's there in a long-term commitment. The difference being SMU pays cash. They're doing a major renovation project to Gerald Ford Stadium, and no, it's not named after the former president, where they have like a big grass area, general seating, and they're closing all that up, putting in suites and whatever. They didn't even do a fundraising campaign for it. They had 4 people pony up the money in cash. Here it is. Go break ground. Do what you got to do. Done. So that was a big help. Jim Phillips also needed to make sure he had numbers in his conference, because, and we're going to go back to this, and we're going to be doing it for another couple years, that grant of rights. I am not saying that it's a lock Florida State's going to do this. It's a lock that Clemson's going to do it. North Carolina probably can't do it, and Virginia can't probably do what I'm about to say. It's the choice of law clause that is going to bite the conference in the rear end, because it doesn't exist in the grant of rights. It isn't in there. So what's the choice of law? If you want to sue your credit card company, you have to do it in Delaware, because the contract you signed when you got your American Express card says so. There's a choice of law clause. There are also clauses about having to do arbitration, having to agree to mediation, before you do the lawsuit. All of those things are in there. I learned moving from Los Angeles to Charlotte, North Carolina, you want to sue your moving company because they broke a bunch of stuff, and being 4 weeks late, you actually have to sue them in the state of Florida, because that's where every moving company is licensed. That clause doesn't exist in the grant of rights. It isn't there. So what happens next? Florida State purposely, and there's a reason I'm choosing Florida State, purposely violates the grant of rights. They start negotiating with ESPN to go to the SEC or go do something else, right? And they violate the grant of rights. And they're violating it on purpose. They are antagonizing the conference to sue them. They get to choose the venue because it's not ordained in the grant of rights. They're going to choose the state of Florida, obviously, to have the lawsuit. You know what's going to happen? Look at the state of Florida. And look what happened with the state of Texas. And Tony's nodding because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. Mike Leach sued Texas Tech for wrongful termination, and the state of Tech, and the case was dismissed, even though he was right, even though he was correct, had every legal matter on his side, because the legislature for the state of Texas passed a law that protected the state schools from breach of contract lawsuits. I promise you, the state of Florida legislature will do that to protect Florida State, to allow them to go get a better TV deal somewhere else. Because as of the new Big Ten deal, Rutgers is making twice as much as Florida State and Clemson and everybody else, as is Maryland. And name the bottom feeder schools. They're making more than the top end schools in the ACC by a lot. So watch that coming in the next year or two, which is why another reason why Florida State needed to shut up. Stop talking about it. Let us maneuver behind the scenes.
And that's a state government that,
absolutely,
as the Disney people will tell you, does not hesitate to abuse its own laws.
Nope.
And throw things into the wind. So
absolutely. And I will say though, the state of South Carolina would do it to protect Clemson. The rest of them, maybe not so much, but
the one thing I have been told, being around Florida people and talking to some other folks, is that the smartest thing that Florida State could do, if Florida State wanted to join the SEC tomorrow, would be for the governor to give Disney its seats back on the Reedy Creek Improvement District, which is the multi-billion-dollar entity that manages the real estate of Disney World, that is a nasty, actually totally illegal abuse of power by the state of Florida that is going to find its way through federal courts. But if they just wanted to solve that tomorrow, Florida State could go wherever. ESPN, Disney corporate would be happy to make sure Florida State went wherever it wanted.
I think you're 100% right. Yeah, your Florida contact who told you that, I think that is spot on correct. It also would help appease some of the residents of that area who, once they stripped Disney of their ownership rights in that area, all of a sudden had to start paying their own water bills and electric bills and things like that Disney had been covering for all those years. So I look, that's a very real possibility down the road, because it astonishingly is not covered in the grant of rights.
I am certainly on record in favor of the state of Florida taking any conditions away from Disney that should not have been in place to begin with. However, we won't go into politics. What's that?
I didn't even think about your tie to it. That's funny. You're right.
No, really, that has nothing to do with it necessarily. But
Mark shows up next week with one of those big governors Florida flags behind him.
I wanted to get back to SMU because I'm curious about this. SMU's desire to get into the ACC, did that have to do with Stanford and Cal prestige and them going along?
No.
Because would they not have wanted to join the Big 12, and would the Big 12 not want SMU during this just grab bag that the Big 12 is doing with anyone that's close that can field a football team?
So the SMU boosters have told me that they wanted the ACC the whole time. This was before the PAC. The PAC was a good backup because the ACC wasn't going to take them. They think that they fit with Wake Forest and Duke and Syracuse. Again, the other former Methodist schools. And the advantage, at least that they told me, that they thought the prestige of Stanford and Cal. So now for them to get the Stanford and Cal and all the ACC stuff, and they get to be a part of the ACC that just sort of fits them better.
Yeah, it's been a long push of wanting to be in a Power 5 conference. And Tony's right. They felt the fit was best in the ACC. They felt that they were more high end than most of the Big 12, certainly financially, look, when I spent that time covering SMU, when the Pac-12 shut down COVID, and I was going back and forth to Dallas, and you look at the campus and you look at the area around campus, and it truly is beautiful. And you can, not to be glib about it, but you can really smell the money as you're walking around that area. And that there was a feeling amongst many of the high-end boosters that they were above being in the Big 12, especially a Big 12 that didn't include Texas and the Texas money. So the ACC was the next logical one. But first and foremost, it was wanting to be part of a Power 5 conference.
Well, and also one of the other things for the Big 12, and this is in the defense of the Big 12. So like 2 years ago when the Texas thing came out, looking at metrics and all that, SMU makes all the sense in the world for the Big 12, but kind of the last thing in the world they need is another small private school in North Texas that doesn't own its own media market, really.
Well,
they got like 3 of them. They're good.
And Texas Tech, Baylor, TCU didn't want anything to do with yet another Texas school in the conference when it comes to recruiting.
Well, and I
want nothing to do with that.
Well, and I was also told that Iowa State, Kansas State, Oklahoma State did not want any more center of gravity in the state of Texas for that conference.